So here we're going to do a tutorial on how to do a Venetian Picot edge for embroidery. And so what this stitch first starts off with is a buttonhole stitch. So if you've not done a buttonhole stitch, familiarize yourself with that process. Generally, I'm coming about a little over 1/8 of an inch down from the top edge of my fabric, which is just a plain cotton weave. I'm going to insert my needle at a 90-degree angle so that it is being consistent on the back side. I'm pulling it up through the loop that is created, and this forms a knot on the top of my thread. Now, the thing that I am doing with this particular stitch is I have 5 stitches between each of my picots, which are these little pieces sticking up. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have 5 there. So this next one needs to be a picot. So it starts off just like the regular buttonhole thread stitch. So I am going to pull that down and back through the loop. And if I was to tighten this, it would look like any of the other stitches in between. But instead, what I would like to do is this is going to become my picot. So I want to first make sure that I'm not tightening it, but I am actually going to leave the loop a little bit longer, and it should be, when pulled taut, the same height as my previous picots. So that's my goal, is to keep those the same. Now, if you look at this, I have thread 1, I have thread 2, which is coming up between the loop that's formed, and thread 3. So 1, 2, 3. So then I'm going to just take a straight pin and pass threads 1 and 2. But before 3, I'm going to come straight down through the edge of my fabric. It's not grabbing a lot, just enough to anchor it. And then I'm going to just pull it down so that it's hanging down below. This end doesn't really matter where it's coming out. So keeping 1 and 2 to the left of my needle, or my pin here. So I have 1, 2, pin, 3. Now I'm bringing my needle with a thread on it underneath the pin, and it's going to wrap around in a large circle going clockwise. And at this point, I personally like to turn it in a 90-degree angle. Then I now have 4 threads. So if we remember, we had 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 and 2 are on the one side of the pin, and 3 and 4 are on the other side of the pin. Now, taking my needle, I'm going to come under 1 and 2, grabbing those, going over the pin, and then coming back under 3 and over 4. So sort of weaving it in a way. And then I am going to pull that tight, creating a knot at the top of my loop. And this becomes the top stitch of the picot. So then I'm going to pull this under and come through the loop. So we have a new loop that's been formed. So I'm going under my pin and through the loop. And I'm going to do this 4 times. So I have 5 knots on here. So that's knot number 2, knot number 3, knot number 4, and knot number 5 is this one. So I have 5 knots that are stacked on top of each other in this tiny loop. That's my picot. Then turning it back so that it's the picots are aiming away from me, I'm going to pull my pin out, and now that is done. So then I now continue with my buttonhole stitch. The buttonhole stitch is the same as the blanket stitch. Buttonhole stitches are just closer, but blanket stitches tend to be spaced apart. Ideally, they are laying close enough together so you wouldn't be getting any of these white gaps. Like here, I feel like that got a little far apart in that section, but other sections it's nice and tight. That's why we do samplers, so that we can figure out what that approximate spacing is. And this is true of anything. If you're doing embroidery, If you're doing knitting, if you're doing crocheting, I always recommend doing a sampler first. And so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, one more. And that is 5. So now my next stitch will be a picot. Now my thread's getting a little twisted. If I just hold my needle up and separate that, it will help the twist come out of it and less likely to knot on me. So as I'm going into this stitch, again, it starts off as just a regular buttonhole stitch. So that looks exactly like what we've already been doing. Then we are going to pull this so that the loop, this loop here, is the same height as my other picots. Right now you can see that it is too long. So I need to pull the thread in the middle just a little bit shorter, tightening that, and then get it to be that length that I want it to be. I think that's a good length right there. So then again, I have threads 1, thread 2, thread 3. So 1, 2, 3. So keeping 1 and 2 to the left side, I'm going to use my pin, anchoring just through the very top of the fabric and then pulling it back down. So I still only have 3 threads here. I have 1, 2, and 3. Then coming under the pin, that becomes my 4th thread there. This is where I like to turn it to the side, and I come around in a full circle, and then I'm going to go under 1 and 2. I'm going to go over my pin. I'm going to grab 3 and go under it, but over 4. And then I'm just going to pull that tight. That becomes the top of my picot, and there's a little knot there. And now I'm going to do 4 buttonhole stitches below that. Okay, now my 4 stitches are done. There's my little picot. It looks a lot like a bullion if you've done bullions and embroidery before. It's just not anchored on both sides. It's sticking out. And so I pull my pin out, and then I'm going to do my next buttonhole thread right directly next to it. And that will hold it in place. And then I continue. I'll do one more. Always go down from the top side to the bottom. It's consistency that's important. When I'm doing repetitive things, it's easy to lose count. So again, I'm just going to double check, and I have 1. See if I can use my pen to count these. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So then we are going to do our next picot. Coming under the pin, going full circle around. I go under 1, under 2 is trying to slip away, under 1, under 2, over the pin, under 3. So it's sort of like weaving, because you're going under the first 2, then you're going over the pin, then you're going under the 3rd one, and you're going over the 4th one. And then I pull that tight, and then I just do some buttonhole stitches here, going under the pin and up through the loop, trying not to catch it on the end of the pin. Always the problem with sewing with pins. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I have 5 knots, my first initial picot stitch, and then the 4 buttonholes underneath it. Turn it back to this direction and continue. And you can just keep proceeding in this manner until you are done for the length of however long you want this edge stitch to be on. When you get to a place where you want to knot it, I'm going to knot it after my 3rd one here. So that's 1, 2, and 3. So we'll knot it here. When knotting a buttonhole or a blanket stitch, just remember that you do have to anchor the tip, otherwise it's just going to come undone. So I just stitched through the very tip top of that fold. Oh, try not to catch your picot. And that just anchors everything so it doesn't come undone. And then I'm going to just come back down